All right, welcome everyone to Table Talk, where we talk all things tabletop. I'm your host, the Bad Luck Gamer, without my co-host, Glue Boy. Yes, this is a year full of new things, new changes, but some things stay exactly the same. So, no Alex today. He's been claimed by Nurgle. So let's get. Let's see here. Where is my Nurgle counter? Background. Let's see. YouTube. Resources. Or is it stream assets? I have it somewhere. It's been a minute, I have to admit. Alex was pretty good last year. The counter did not get that high. It has to be here. Have a stream. I'm just Nurgle. There we go. Alright. Boop. Front. Here we go. We got a Nurgle counter today. Actually, it should go where Alex normally sits. There you go. All right, the Nurgle counter is up. No Glue Boy today. But we will see how the rest of the year goes. I actually only had 2 in the Nurgle counter last year, which is impressive if you know who Alex is or Glue Boy. So, you know, there's hope. There's hope for a good year. I almost called out myself. I've been pretty dad tired lately, but I wanted to talk about today's today's subject a lot, and it sucks that Alex isn't here. Because today's subject would have been really good to have his opinion on, honestly. Because I think this is a very fascinating subject for a genre of gaming that honestly is not super well defined. So, before we get into that, and while we let some people hop into chat here, just some news. So, you know, a lot of life stuff is happening with a lot of my players in my games. So we didn't have a 333 game this week. We may not have one next week. It really depends on how their moving situation goes. But if we do, then yay, we'll have more 333. This gives me plenty of time to actually write down a lot of the system that I haven't been doing before. And if you don't know what the 333 is, that is my new game project that I'm currently making. And I can't help it, lol. Now I'm just sick and playing Last Epoch. To be fair, I was also playing Last Epoch earlier. This is, yeah, I know. I own the game. I played it when it first came out. I'm playing now. I'm playing a Sentinel Forge Master. I want to hit things with a big sword. But yeah, so 333 is my Eldritch investigation / horror TTRPG game that is a huge focus on narrative crunch, and it's a project I'm very excited about. I think the game is really, really good, and it's going to be really fun fleshing it out with my friends. So that's what we're going to be doing online. And you're going Void Knight, nice. To be fair, Void Knight's is really good. So, but yeah, so things are still a little in the air as far as videos on the channel are concerned. Still have a baby, still have very little time. Hopefully that changes in the near future. Well, hopefully I still have a baby in the near future, but Well, I will have a baby in the near future, we'll say that. But I mean, hopefully I will have more time to make videos in the near future, because there's a lot I want to talk about. Like Paizo's coming out with crazy stuff this year. We also have Starfinder 2E releasing this year. There's a lot of variety stuff. I want to talk more about Fabula Ultima. I want to talk more about some of the Lancer stuff and some other games by Orbital Dropkick, and the Cosmere RPG for sure. It's definitely a game that I have a lot of faith in will match my general style more. It would probably become my new favorite game if it wasn't for the 333, which I'm designing specifically to be my like ideal system. So but yeah, so videos will be continuing in the near future when Belle just gets a little bit older. She can become a little bit more self-sufficient, or at least she can be left alone for longer periods of time. But I can honestly tell you, especially this last week, I've had absolutely zero time to make stuff. Starfinder 2 in Pathfinder 2E thoughts? What do you mean? Are you talking about Starfinder 2E characters in the setting of Pathfinder 2E? Or are you talking about mixing Pathfinder 2E and Starfinder 2E characters? And yeah, Andrew, I'm super hyped for the Cosmere. Oh, Fantasy Flight was Edge Studios. Interesting. I've heard some things about Genesis. I haven't really looked into it. And that's also something I wanna make special mention of today. Across. Something special I want to make mention of today. I have played an impressive number of TTRPGs for like a fair bit, not just one-shots. I think I've played like 34 different TTRPGs at this point for more than just a one-shot. That's still far from away from like a good, like a majority of them. And I haven't played some of the key ones like Call of Cthulhu. So, you know, this is a conversation that's very speculative based on the idea of what is a good tabletop in people's opinion versus like what is the reality of tabletop, because I think those are some very interesting points across. So the problem with crossing the two systems is they're designed for two wildly different settings. So I know a lot of people have been currently talking about like how Starfinder 2E characters seem to be way stronger than Pathfinder 2E characters, which I don't necessarily agree with. But what I do agree with is guns are supposed to be really, really strong. So a set of classes that are not designed to work around guns doesn't feel like they're going to do super duper well. I think they're pretty comparable still, and I think you could still have fun. Oh, interesting. Alex would like to know that. All right. Because I know he likes that Star Wars system. So, that's good to know. But as far as Starfinder 2E and stuff, they're just not meant to be the same game. And I think a lot of people are just conflating the two together because they use the same core system. But they're not made with the core ideas, nor are they made with the same development team. The Starfinder 2E team and the Pathfinder 2E team have very little creative crossover. And so there's just going to be some different design principles, and it's going to be designed with the idea of making their individual games work the best. Doesn't mean you can't do it. Doesn't mean you can't have fun. I definitely think you can. I don't think the differences are that crazy. But when it comes to games like Pathfinder 2E especially, people get really obsessed with the numbers. And so it's something that I feel like is not a healthy conversation, because it comes with a lot of like... It comes with a lot of preconceived notions that are not healthy for either game. So those are my thoughts. But all right, we got a good number of people here. So let's talk about the general subject today. So what's the best TTRPG? This is a very interesting question, but let's try to narrow it down just a hair and say TTRPG, like, you know, the standard D&D-esque style game. You know, I hate to use the Band-Aid term, but like there's a lot of technically tabletop games that are RPGs that are not the same thing. So what's the best one? Well, we could talk commercially speaking, and while we definitely don't have very good numbers like across the world, there are just some markets that are just harder to get information on, and we just don't know a lot, and then there's language barrier conversions and everything. I would still hazard a guess that the most successful TTRPG is Dungeons and Dragons. No, not high fantasy. I'm talking you're rolling dice and role-playing as characters, not like board games, because there are board games that you can play that have RPG elements that technically count as TTRPGs, which is, you know, most people will say, well, yeah, but those are board games. Some of them get pretty into it. Tactical cinematic combat, to be specific. Oh, yeah, I get what you mean. But let's say that, like, market success-wise, it's D&D. That's such an interesting fact, considering how flawed the D&D core rule set is. Like, a lot of people enjoy the fact that the game has lots of holes that they can fill in with their own homebrew, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but the game itself does not provide guidance even for that, or at least not very good guidance. And honestly, probably even less guidance for how to use its actual systems. The game is renowned for finding broken combos of things and just allowing players to ruin the game for the game's sake. You know, not only that, but just unequal love across the board when it comes to some of the classes, like Ranger, for instance, or Monk. Again, doesn't mean you can't enjoy those things. Doesn't mean that they're bad inherently. It's just very, very limited. Mostly it's brand name, yeah. But see, that's the point I'm making here. It's very interesting because you can just honestly say, it's a fact, more people, a grander number of people play D&D than any other TTRPG. And that's just a fact. That's just how it is. It's wild how that game is as successful as it is, and a lot of it comes with a lot of factors. And this isn't like a breakdown of D&D as a game. It's just, it holds this spot in this conversation. So, is that the best TTRPG? And I think a lot of people would disagree. I think even people who play D&D would necessarily disagree, because they would be like, it's good, but you know, it's got flaws and everything like that. Or at least people who actually like play TTRPGs. And that's actually kind of brings up my next point. Like, it's almost impossible to know of total game time which TTRPGs get the most playtime. Now, sure, you could use metrics like Roll20 to determine like the number of game hours in those games, but those numbers are very, very easy to inflate artificially. Someone just sitting in a window with their game open is inflating that number dramatically. And so it can be really hard. I would say a really good argument is for Call of Cthulhu. Call of Cthulhu has a very big, like, niche base of people who play the game consistently and a lot of the time. And if you look on Roll20 and stuff like that, you'll see that Call of Cthulhu has probably some of the highest like play times of any games besides like D&D. It's pretty wild. Now, Call of Cthulhu is a game I haven't even played, so I can't really speak too much on it. I've looked into it quite a bit, though, because it's fascinating. But, you know, so we don't even really know, because that's just including online time, where that's not including, you know, people's home games or all kinds of things. But Call of Cthulhu, I would say, is definitely probably one of the front runners for just like overall player time, though that might be changing. I think Pathfinder 2nd Edition is starting to get a lot more notice, especially with a lot of D&D content creators who are making Pathfinder related content. So I think those numbers are probably going to wildly change here in the next few years. But by my best estimate, I think Call of Cthulhu is probably one of the strongest ones running in that market. And but now, what if you have a very different interpretation of what a true TTRPG is, you know? Because if I'm going to be honest, games like Pathfinder 2nd Edition, which is still currently my favorite TTRPG, doesn't have that very deep or really engaging narrative mechanics or narrative really anything. The game really relies on you to do a majority of the narrative lifting, and that's not bad. And there's a lot of people who are like, well, yeah, well, that's the whole point, right? It's a very solid system that we can tell stories with. I disagree, because there are games out there that provide very interesting narrative-based mechanics that make for more interesting narratives to tell more interesting stories. And for me personally, tabletop games are always something, or TTRPGs are always something of blending the active storytelling with game mechanics. And so having a game say, here's your game mechanics, tell a good story with it, doesn't really like offer a blend, if you know what I mean. Like, sure, they have some stuff, but not a lot. Not compared to, say, Blades in the Dark. Blades in the Dark, I think, is probably one of the best examples of a game that has a lot of narrative mechanics that really make for interesting storytelling and are not super crunchy, that offer fascinating ways of telling stories and in ways of making people interested in telling stories. But okay, maybe you just like dungeon crawling, right? Isn't that like a core basis for why this genre kind of got popular in the first place? Playing heroes, going into dungeons, getting loot, leveling up. So what is the best tactical based, you know, TTRPG, or the best like mechanical RPG of TTRPGs? I would say definitely would be Pathfinder 2nd Edition for sure, though Lancer, I think, offers a really incredibly fun tactical game, though very, very minimal narrative elements to it. So, you know, it depends on a lot of different factors. Would you differentiate between storytelling and story building with the players? What's the difference? If you could explain to me so I can understand what you mean. I think Starfinder 2e will steal the best title for me. Love magic plus text-based opera setting combined with the reaction thing. I mean, so that's a very interesting point as well, because it doesn't matter how good a TTRPG is if it doesn't match the narrative themes of stories you want to tell. At least it doesn't for me, right? I want to tell interesting stories about particular subjects, and sometimes that's just really hard. I'm a pretty good, you know, GM by my standards, and I struggled running Lancer because I'm so unfamiliar with that general genre in space, and I could do definitely better. A story seed versus a narrative, those are still the same thing. You're not making a difference. A story seed is just a narrative that isn't like written out. So are you talking about like a pre-made adventure versus just like a on-the-fly improv game. I don't want to assume what you're saying, so I'm giving you a chance to like elaborate, but those are still very much of the same vein. So the best TTRPG as like an interesting conversation, I think this is something that a lot of people... Yeah, for sure. And from that, I don't really have complaints on that. Yeah, and see, this is the thing, right? Is there's so many games that like, oh, this game offers a lot of narrative aids, but there's a lot of people out there who are like, well, I don't need narrative aids. I've been doing this forever, you know, a grognard, and so I don't need anything. But just because you don't need it or you're capable of using without it doesn't mean... I'm explaining badly. English is not my first language. Yes, freeform versus written. No worries. I mean, it's just, again, we have to communicate, and I'm trying my best to. Freeform versus a written adventure. Would I differentiate between the two? I think that's a different conversation, because pre-written anything requires that it matches the system, it's written well, it's typically third party, while like games that offer nothing but story seeds can be very interesting, but they are very much more taxing on the GM, because the GM is the one who has to come up with things on the fly. You know what I mean? So would I differentiate them? Probably not, because even a standard pre-made adventure or pre-written adventure is not necessarily going to be like 100% following the word. And in fact, it's oftentimes best when you start improving and forming the story around the players, and then you're using it more as a guideline, which is kind of what a story seed does, only just much less structured. But you know, and neither of these are really dependent on the system itself. So but the best TTRPG is something that's very subjective. It's not very objective, because if we're talking objective, then it's going to be maybe D&D, maybe Call of Cthulhu, depending on your metric. You know, it's either the game most widely played or the game with the most hours played by people ever, you know. And even then, we honestly can't know much about the second one. Markets, at least, we can look at somewhat, but not how much people are actually playing, because I do know there's a ton of people who play Shadowrun, and Shadowrun is a wild game. But the major crux of this conversation is it's hard to define, because the TTRPG genre is very ill-defined in itself. Sure, you could talk about genres, you could talk about the themes of an individual game or the kinds of things it tries to portray, but we don't have a very robust way of differentiating them. You know, we don't have the roguelites or FPSs or 4Xs for the TTRPG genre, or at least not in a very recognizable way, where we're using it in our common vernacular to differentiate the games. Because when people talk about TTRPGs, mostly the image that comes to the mind is D&D, Pathfinder 2e, you know, maybe Call of Cthulhu, maybe Blades in the Dark, all of which are very wildly different games that approach the space in very different ways and have very different goals. And so how can you then rate a game? How can you identify whether a game is good versus not good if there's so many different angles and so many different approaches? And that's a very interesting take and a very interesting idea, because this just is all over the internet in general, but people will say this game sucks because it just doesn't match what they think the game should be like, or doesn't match their personal tastes or whatever. But, you know, we live in an era where everyone's giving their opinions, and typically the people with the widest reach tend to have more reasonable approaches, barring a few, you know. There's a lot of content creators that I think have a very, like, open view that do very well. To be fair, there's also a lot of content creators who are very close-minded, but that's kind of their niche and kind of their pull. But, it's something that I think this is such a fascinating conversation, and I think it just keeps boiling down to we just don't have very well-defined genres in the TTRPG space. Like, Lancer's a very fun tactical TTRPG, but it has shit for narrative anything, really. Like, with the characters, you can't build your character narratively. You can't build your character to do narrative things. Like, not really. It's something that you just kind of do by grace of telling a story. And I don't agree with Orbital Dropkick's idea that, well, I leave the story bits to you because you're telling a story, and I don't feel like they need to have as much mechanics as like the gamey bits. I just disagree because, you know, like it was mentioned in the chat earlier, Cosmere RPG has mechanical narrative elements that not only affect how you play the game, but are tied to your character's story, what they're capable of, what their, you know, what their background is, all kinds of stuff like that. So it's because of this, it's like I view Lancer very differently than I view most other TTRPGs. Pathfinder, to much the same degree, with a little bit more wiggle room in bringing it closer to a more narrative-based game, it's still predominantly and almost wholly a combat-based tactical game with some decent elements revolving outside in like exploration mode and with like general RPG moments, but it doesn't really have a lot of meat on its bone when it comes to those elements. And so it's like, it's there somewhat, you know. Role-playing is mostly just based on the player's ability and not the game helping them with that. But we're not even getting started with D&D. D&D has story by grace of people just trying to make the game work and needing to have some narrative reason for why things happen. So, you know, if a game not offering any kind of narrative guidance framework or mechanics that can be actively interacted with isn't an excuse to say, well, it's just because I'm good at the game that this is a good game. It's like, no, that it fills a very specific niche, and it does a very specific thing that you're okay with running it that way, but some other people might not be, you know. Hello, Hoyle. How you doing? Hoyle Appa. Let's talk about another game like Fabula Ultima. Fabula Ultima is a fascinating game because it has actually narrative mechanics where you can spend Fabula points to adjust the scene, adjust storytelling. It's not the only game that does this either. There's a lot of games that have the ability to interactively adjust the story or give your own input into the world around you, with the GM's permission, of course, but in a mechanical way that motivates players to interact with it in that way. So that is a narrative mechanic. It's not super well fleshed out. It doesn't have a very strong framework. I've played Fabula Ultima a bunch, and my players still don't really know how to use Fabula points all that well, but that's honestly more than what even Pathfinder 2e has, you know. In Pathfinder 2e, the players don't really have the ability to just create story elements as a mechanic. Please call me a hole. Okay, or hole, okay, or hoy? Hoy, there you go. Ah, okay. Gotcha, Hoy. I'll do my best. So, you know, And Darrow has an interesting point here. So Shadowrun has an interesting lore, even if it sounds really strange. Cyberpunk plus magic, but internet is full of people asking what system is best to play Shadowrun without using its own. Yeah. So that's a good point. Like, the Shadowrun game is for a very particular group of people, mechanically speaking, even though the setting is very, very interesting. Honestly, I would probably, if I wanted to get like the best match, I'd probably use like the World of Darkness or Chronicles of Darkness, either of those two, like general system frames for Shadowrun, because I think it blends in really, really well. But then again, for the people who like Shadowrun, it would just be a different game and they wouldn't enjoy it as much, because there's parts about that clunky system that people really, really like. So, Eurojank for a reason. It's interesting, and I want to advocate for more genre-defining terms. Savage World's simple. It's the only system I found today that gets superpowers somewhat right. Well, and here's another thing as well. It's dramatically difficult to try out different tabletop games because it's very time consuming. So, I mean, most people have a very just lacking knowledge in the TTRPG space. And so it's like, oh yeah, well, of the 10, even if it's like, how many I played, like 34 plus games, of 16 different main, like, different systems. It still pales in comparison to the grand majority of TTRPG space, Like I said, I haven't even played Call of Cthulhu. That's a huge one. I haven't played really any OSR games, and I know that's a very huge niche in the space as well. And the thing is, though, OSR actually is a defined genre, and people who use it like know what you're talking about when it's OSR. So it's something that I think this question is so fascinating because we just don't live in a time period where we can really like better gauge this. Unlike in video games where you can look at a large number of metrics and a lot of people can get a hold of the game and play for 48 hours or 60 hours or 100 hours, Like 100 hours in TTRPGs, that's nothing. That's maybe you're getting to know the game, maybe at that point, And like in my own experience, right? A game that I definitely wouldn't say is anywhere near what would be considered the best TTRPG, but is the game I've had my best TTRPG moments in, is Anima Beyond Fantasy. And Anima Beyond Fantasy is a crazy game. There's almost nothing you can't do in Anima Beyond Fantasy if you know how to build your character correctly. Any anime character, any character in most universes, you could probably create using that game's systems. But the game is super janky and is very poorly balanced. And I think even more than that, it's just not very user-friendly, like, in general. You have to make a bad character first before you know what a good character looks like. Because the number of people, almost everyone I've seen ever touch that game, make a very horrendous character first. And then they play it and they're like, oh, I see what I'm not doing here. Okay. And then their next character is like marginally better. And that's not good game design. But despite that, it's the game system I've had my best, most memorable moments, and I have people who would nearly pay me to run that game again. It's a game that I have a very extensive legacy in amongst my friends. And I'm probably never going to touch that game again with a 10-foot pole. I feel that way about Mage. I've heard similar things about Mage. Yeah, Mage is one of those games that's just like, it can be really, really fun. But it's a crazy, kooky system. And that's like a lot of World of Darkness games in general. And that's also like an interesting thing about TTRPGs is when people get together and talk about the space in general, their viewpoints on what is good versus not good are so wildly different. Like, I love Pathfinder 2nd Edition, but my God, does a large number of people in the space, especially on Reddit, make me want to pull my hair out. Because it's all about what does the most damage, what gives you the most bonuses, what lets you do the things the most. Let's compare these two wildly different things, thematically speaking. You know, like, it's a game that really motivates the player base to really be worried about and concerned with the numbers, because it's a game that is very, very well designed with the numbers in mind. It's a very balanced game, and that's the weird thing about it, is it's an incredibly balanced game, and all these gains that people are looking for are minuscule. Plus 5% to 10% more likelihoodness of doing things is really a small metric. Sure, it does add up over a campaign, I agree. How to get the highest reach? Yeah, exactly. Giant barbarians unite, being absolute menaces on the battlefield. I had that. My nicest moment was when a min-maxer noticed he can't roll the dice. Yeah, you know. It's like, it's crazy how much people look at Pathfinder 2nd Edition as more of like a video game or a board game than they do like an actual narrative experience. Which is wild to me. And like, I have my tier list for the classes at the moment, and people give me such wildly like, either people agree with everything I say or wildly disagree and cannot see why I rated the things the way I did. Or like, I make videos and I'm like, oh yeah, if you have room in your kit, add some charisma here or there. And people are like, why charisma? Why not wisdom? I would rather have higher will saves than be able to talk to people better. And it's like, what kind of adventure are you running? I mean, sure, if you're not the face of your group, I guess that's fine. But like, that just means that there's just parts of the game that you just can't operate in if you don't even have like a little bit. So I find it strange that you prioritize combat so much. I find that particularly upsetting because things like free archetype add so much flavor. Exactly, Duncan. Exactly my point. I love many of the archetypes, and they just don't feel good sometimes to use, because sometimes, yeah, I had people who played like the game as a math problem. Exactly, yeah. But it's like they just don't feel good to use sometimes, because you're trading relative power for a lot of those kind of things, which sucks, because the game doesn't offer a balance to like power gain versus narrative gain, because the game isn't necessarily designed to help you out narratively. It's designed more to help you out mechanically. Sure, there's narrative things, I agree, but the game doesn't mechanically reward you in any way playing a narratively interesting character. Pathfinder, I think this is a really good way of putting it. Pathfinder rewards your role play almost like nothing. There's no mechanical or no like system give for your narrative characters. It's all on the GM. It's all on your group, on if you make an interesting character, how much of a benefit that is to you, versus a mechanically like competent character, which is sad, to say the least. Not that it's a bad game. It's not a bad game. But it feels bad to feel that way for someone like me who really likes the game. My party is exactly that. We destroy the boss and then we die to a hazard because no one has master religion or thievery to solve problems without punching. Yeah, exactly. The game doesn't reward you that well because it's designed as a combat game. It's designed as a tactical combat game. You know, that's its core function. You can't even argue that that's not its core function because the majority of rules in the game are orientated around that simple fact. Like, sure, exploration, I could say to some degree is rewarded pretty well in the game, but definitely not narratively speaking. Most classes don't even, like, fighter has zero narrative function. It just does combat good. Also, many forget that the character is alive in the game world. They become stagnated. Yeah, I get what you mean, Hoy. Yeah, many characters just kind of become less fun to play because you've just done the build and then you're done. You're not telling an interesting story. You're not excited for your character's next chapter. You're just like, do I get the thing? Cool. Yeah, Rex. Yeah, you can kind of see it in the background there. I want to, at some point in the future, change my setup a bit. Put a big shelf behind me. I don't have a green screen right now because I have a baby, and moving like her bassinet or her carriage near my computer so I can do things is just an inconvenience. So I don't have a green screen at the moment. But yeah, I definitely want to, because like I have board games on the floor. That shelf there my fiance made for me is absolutely wonderful, and my board games are breaking it. I need something bigger and more robust, and a better display area in general. That's why I like to play reactionary. I love with the question of what was my character learned in that last session. Yeah, I think that's a very valid way to play, and that's great, but the game doesn't offer that to you. The system itself doesn't offer that to you. I like Monster of the Week is a really fun game, though it doesn't have a lot of mechanical depth, and so it's something that I got bored with after a little bit. But I really like it because many of your abilities in that game imply very interesting narrative elements for your character, which makes Monster of the Week really, really strong as a narrative game, and it functions mostly as a narrative game. But there's not a lot of system to actually like play around with. And so it has the exact opposite problem, which is there's not enough mechanics to actively build anything, and just you again are only rewarded based on how good your own storytelling ability is, and not necessarily based on how you build your character. So yeah, it's a very interesting thing in the TTRPG space, where a lot of you here seem to obviously understand that the games just aren't necessarily hitting all your proper like metrics. They're not hitting everything you like. Maybe there's a game you really, really do like, but there's probably some part of it that is lackluster in some degree. And that's not bad. It's just like, I can like a first-person shooter game, but I really like RPG elements. But some RPGs are just not actiony enough for me, or don't have interesting enough mechanics, or don't make me like think a lot. So I just don't get interested in them. So like, I think TRPGs need just better defining language for how, like, OSR is really, really good at defining what it is, because people who know what OSR is understand what kind of games are getting into, and those kind of games are somewhat different than other TTRPGs in some pretty reasonable ways. And when people use language like rules light, I think rules light is a very terrible way of defining a game, because rules light doesn't imply anything other than that the game doesn't have a lot of rules. That doesn't mean that it plays in a very specific way, or that it, like, what kind of experience you're even gonna get the only thing you can really expect is maybe you're playing a one-sheet character, or like a one-character sheet game where everything you need to play the game is just all on your character sheet, and you don't need to have a rule book even for it. You know, it's I don't like the term rules light, because rules light also seems to imply to some people that it's an easier game or it's less like crunchy, when I would say rules light as a narrative game is way more difficult than even crunchy games, because you get typically less guidance on how to play the game, and you're just telling a story with some minor rules attached. And that's very difficult for people, especially new people. So rules light implies a lot of things that it really doesn't accurately represent. And I mean, already we've seen here several different games. Let's see. Genesis was mentioned as someone's favorite game. The Savage Worlds general system was mentioned as someone's favorite game here. I know there's a ton of people out there who absolutely love Call of Cthulhu, and there's a lot of people out there who love D&D. And if you guys have some games you like, go ahead, talk about it, you know, like bring them up in chat. I think everyone's interest in a game offers an interesting viewpoint that currently we just don't have a culture built in the TTRPG space to like accurately represent. That's one of the reasons why I'm building my own TTRPG currently, because I want a narratively crunchy game. I want a game that has a lot of mechanics that you can interact with on the narrative level, that makes your character have interesting stories, that gives your character a lot of interesting avenues you can take your story, take your individual interests, and like actively work upon them. So I'm designing a game that is based on, do you love telling interesting, fun stories? Here you go. And it has, you know, even tactical TTRPG or tactical theater of the mind stuff. So if you like combat, you can even get a little bit of that in there. Another problem is the lack of immersion for many players. I was literally screamed at because a DM said it in the south gets colder and the north gets warmer. The player didn't accept that they were on the south side of the globe. Interesting. For me, the best TTRPG is the one you make your own. Fully, I recognize that D&D 3.5 is clunky and bloated, but at the same time, I run a futuristic homebrew of 3.5e, which has cyberspace and aliens. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the thing, right? Homebrew is kind of like the ultimate tool, the idea of homebrew, because I know a group of players who are playing a D&D 5e game that has been going on for years now, and it's their favorite TTRPG game. It's their favorite game they've played in, and it's like 90% homebrew. Like, they're not even playing D&D 5e anymore. The GM has changed so many things that it's not even recognizable as the same game anymore. But then it's like, you know, I guess good for them. That doesn't help me. I'm looking for a new game, right? And that's the kind of same thing as like, sure, it's cool that you have a really great homebrew for a very specific game, but what if I'm looking for a new game to play? You know, that's very hard to get into. And I know, because I'm currently designing a game, it's very hard to like accurately make like a PDF or a Google Doc that describes all the changes in your game that makes sense to people, because it probably wasn't done by professional editors and people who are like good at designing documents for public viewing. Maybe you have a really good document, I don't know. But it's just something that's very not likely most of the time. And to be fair, even then, I've played in someone's homebrewed game before. In 3.5, funny enough. D&D 3.5. And it sucked. It sucked butts. And this is someone who gets paid to run games and keeps getting paid to run games. So obviously people like it, but like the experience I had was very not fun, to say the least. And so, you know, just like there's not one video game that's just going to be the best video game for everyone, there's not really one TTRPG that's going to be the best TTRPG for everyone. But if we made better defined genres, like tactical TTRPG or whatever, I feel like that would create better understanding for people who are looking for very specific things in their games. And then we could actually have a metric of like, okay, of tactical TTRPGs, which is the best one? Because then you can have an actual conversation about, in this genre, with this design goal in mind, which game best suits that genre, you know? And sure, games might have multiple genres, like, you know, video games do the same. I have a whole wiki online for it, but I do understand where you're coming from for that. However, there are ways to design a TTRPG system to enable GMs to twist it to make it their own. Yeah, for sure. Again, I think that's the number one reason why I love a lot of like hardcore TTRPG players like D&D 5e, because the base kit is so kind of like basic and flexible in some ways that all they have to do is just make something that just is a bit better defined and can allow them to make a game that people understand pretty easily. Because fundamentally speaking, I think D&D 5e has really, really good fundamentals. Those fundamentals were just not very well utilized for the full game release. Because, like, if you were to compare, let's say, Pathfinder 2e to Vampire the Masquerade, right? Those games have just such wildly different goals and ideas that they just are not comparable. You can't say one is a better TTRPG than the other one because they just don't have almost any cross sections at all. Sure, in Vampire you can do combat, but that's definitely not the best defined way for it. Interesting. I've heard a lot about Fate. I wanted to look into it, and yeah, it's the same thing. It's like, make too many rules for the genre because they had to sell books. Yeah, and that's also a hard thing as well, right? People want to make their passions into something that's profitable so they can, you know, work and play at the same time. But stuff like that happens a lot. And to be fair, the game I'm designing is a very modular game where it's going to have a bunch of systems, a metric ton of systems, but they're opt-in systems. So you only interact with the systems if that's something you're choosing to do in the game. Not like you can't play the game because you don't have all the options kind of stuff. Like Pathfinder 2e, really, really good example of this. It's a really, really fun game, but unless you have a bunch of money to spend, it can feel like you're missing out because there's just player options and character options that just you don't have access to unless you buy the books, especially because Archive and Nethys, bless their souls, just takes a while to get updated because it's all pro bono. It's all free, you know. People donate to the site, sure, but yeah, their last update was April 1st. And the update before that was, I guess, yeah, was back in February. And then before that was early December. And let's see. Yeah, they just recently got, like 2 weeks ago, they just got the Divine Mysteries. Ooh, they have the Rival Academies. Oh, hype. But Divine Mysteries came out in November. So that's what, 5 to 6 months of a book just not being available to get on that website, which sucks. Sucks if you really like the game, and the game is very much based on, you know, player options, builds, all that kind of stuff. Because, hey, I'll be honest, Pathfinder 2nd Edition, despite what I've been saying in this video, or this live stream, it's my favorite game. I love it. It's really good. I think it's really interesting, and I love building characters. I love playing the game. I think mechanically speaking, it's probably one of the better designed TTRPGs in the space to date for things like tactical dungeon crawling, you know, especially because the game actually motivates players to work together, which is really good. It could be better expressed in the books, but like working together in Pathfinder 2nd Edition is a huge power boost to the players involved, which absolutely makes it really good and separates it from other games. So, I don't know. For your favorite game, do you feel like there is a genre you would give it, or a label you would give it that better define it to people? Like, I want to know some of your ideas. How would you define your favorite game, or one of your favorite games, as like a genre in the TTRPG space? Because like Lancer, I'd say tactical TTRPG. It's a tactics first TTRPG, role-playing second. Really, really fun, especially if you like space and mechs and all kinds of stuff like that. A game that I definitely would like to play more of. Favorite theme for a game is superpowers. Sure, theme is interesting, but I'm talking more like genres, I guess. But superpowers, are you talking like superheroes? Or are you just talking purely like supernatural abilities? Because like I have two games that are very much in the super space, but I think are, I don't know, because like Mutants and Masterminds, I wouldn't call a tactical based TTRPG, because tactics is something that would imply that the game has like any standard level of balance, which it definitely does not. I guess I would call it a point buy TTRPG. A TTRPG should feel like and be structured like an action movie like Die Hard. Matt Colville did a great video about that. I disagree, actually. Not that I don't think that's an interesting way of looking at it, but there's a lot of TTRPGs where combat is a thing that you should not do at all, because that means something has gone terribly bad. There's many horror TTRPGs where it's more about creating tension, and it's not the actiony bits, it's the bits in between that matter most. Not superheroes, because I don't think in terms of heroes and villains, most of them are simple, created by word of mouth. So you like supernatural abilities, I guess, is what you're saying. You like having supernatural abilities that feel fun to use. Combat does not mean action. Sure, I agree. But horror movies are not action movies either. They're not really the same genre, no. Thrillers especially, like, because the emphasis are on different things. More like old school comics. I see. So, I think I generally get what you're going for. But that could be expressed in many different kinds of systems. But it's good to have a favorite theme. Because, like, an action movie implies action, right? But thrillers are based on building of tension. You wouldn't say, for instance, Avengers is the same as, like, I don't know, what's a good, like, Alien, right? Alien has really good action moments in it, sure, but it's not an action movie. That's why action movie is its own defined genre, separate from, like, horror. And, like, a lot of World of Darkness does not really play like an action movie when some of the best scenes are the quiet conversations held with powerful individuals, you know, where you're trying to avoid combat as much as possible. You're trying to avoid action as much as possible, you know. I think the idea is for a very specific type of genre of TTRPGs, sure. You could say D&D, you could say Pathfinder 2e, for instance. You could say Lancer, potentially. But there's a lot of TTRPGs I just don't think that would apply to, and if you tried to make it that way, kind of just diminishes what the games are about. But let's see, because, like, I also don't believe in the morality of my players, so calling them heroes is something I deny. That's fair. I get what you mean. Speaking on Vampire the Masquerade, I would call Vampire in many of the World of Darkness games out there like a very intrigue-based games. Action move. You're just saying the same thing over again. Action movie means that the heroes are action heroes. They are people to take action in response to a threat. The action can be verbal, creative, even contemplative. It doesn't have to be physical. All right, let's look up. Let's look up what defines an action movie. Action films are a genre that predominantly feature chase sequences, fights, shootouts, explosions, and stunt work. The specifics of what constitutes an action film has been in scholarly debate since the 1980s. Action films are often hybrids with other genres, mixing into various forms such as comedies, science fiction films, and horror films. But the term action film or action adventure film has been used to define predominantly films that have a strong emphasis on these sequences. And that's the part I disagree with. You can disagree with that interpretation of it, but that's the defined term for it. And there's many TTRPGs out there that do not have those spectacles, stunning things, all that kind of stuff. That's what makes them different. Even when you said here, it can be verbal. That no, a verbal thing isn't an action sequence. It wouldn't be classified as an action sequence. Now, whether or not you would be interested in games that don't have action, that's a very viable thing to put out there, you know. But that's again, not the same thing. Like I said, the World of Darkness, and to be fair, it wasn't a very popular version of the game, but they had the children. What was it? World of Darkness Children? What was that game called? What's up, Children of the Night? I can't remember. There's a World of Darkness game where you play a helpless child who's trying to survive a horror like element, some horror element. And again, the focus on that game is definitely not action, spectacle, or whatever moments define action. The child is not very capable. That's kind of the point of a slice of life in my games. Yeah, and that's true. There are actually slice of life TTRPGs out there too. And that's also super not action-y based whatsoever. To be fair, for a lot of the slice of life kind of games, usually that's like an aside of a different game where it's just like, here's the not action-y moment. Here's the not action-y. Here's the not adventure moment. Here's just our characters living our lives. But there are definitely some slice of life style TTRPGs. I don't know if I would personally be interested in something like that. I think it could be fun, but I myself, funny enough, do crave action in my games. Like, I like to have combative elements. Innocence! Oh, right! Right. Yes, Innocence. My buddy still wants to play a game of that. So the simple question, what do your characters in their free time open so many bottles? I don't know what that last word is. Also, thank you, Ogun. And it's been a while. Nice seeing you here. But I mean, like, the whole point of this conversation is really just further leaned into the point of there's just not great genre-defining elements for many TTRPGs. And we need more. We need more that are more than just, like, base themes. That open so many boxes, ways, or possibilities. Yeah, I mean, like, I if I generally understand what you're trying to say, yeah, there's not a lot of games out there that do a lot of things where, like, just being a person or being alive or just doing their daily things, like, can offer new opportunities, you know? Like, a lot of what a general adventure builds onto is the players proactively pursuing and chasing a lead or reactively responding to some threat or whatever. There's not that element of, like, normal randomness that can occur, or at least not often, not well defined. But yeah, like, Vampire the Masquerade, I think is such a great game, and I think it very much is. Let's see, let's not cross any wires here. What defines a thriller? A genre of fiction characterized by heightened suspense, tension, and excitement, aiming to keep the reader on the edge of their seat. Yeah, like, intrigue and thriller would be things I'd better define how Vampire behaves and plays, especially because the combat in that game is not super good. If I'm going to be honest, you can do it. You can have characters who have combat, but I just don't think if you're going to have combat in a TTRPG, Vampire would be far from one of the first ones I'd make mention of specifically. Oh, you don't like horror? Interesting. Been trying to decide my favorite sim for last 3 minutes, but so it depends on other players that I can't. You know what? I totally feel that though. Or a, however you want it pronounced. That's such a real take, right? Because the key defining thing in TTRPGs in general is it's a social game. To be fair, there are single player TTRPGs, so not inherently, I guess, but for the majority of people. And so it's like, what games can you play best with other people? But I think you could probably definitely have some things you would like to have in a game over others, or a game that you've had the best experiences in. But like, I would say my best TTRPG experiences are not in Pathfinder 2e, which is my current favorite game. They're in Anima Beyond Fantasy, which is a very horrendously designed game that is fun if everyone's on the same page. Like, I have players I could have a good time playing Anima with, and I have players I know I would have an utterly terrible time playing Anima with. And that sucks. And that's just not a good game, in my opinion. I think Vampire is intended to be played as horror. I would say thriller more than horror, but I think horror is a big part. I mean, World of Darkness in general is designed to be kind of horror. Or, no, I would say thriller. I think it's thriller and just different flavors of it. Vampire can have more horror, but Mage isn't really horror. Mage is a lot more thriller and, like, probably action-y. I mean, yeah, honestly, Vampire the Masquerade is very much drama in many ways. And like I said earlier, like, there's just so many games that, sure, they may contain, like, Vampire has combat, but I wouldn't say it's a tactical TTRPG. I wouldn't even say it's an action TTRPG. But you can have action in it. I don't think that defines the game, though. I don't think if you were trying to help someone pick a game, you would say, Vampire has those action elements you want. Yeah. That's fair. But either way, mostly the same kind of thing. And just like action-based games don't technically, like, you could play Pathfinder 2e and never have combat. I don't know why you would. Oh, we got a bot. As I was saying, though, I don't know why you would play Pathfinder without playing combat, because a grand majority of the game is designed around combat, but you can do it, and you can have fun. I think that's a part of media literacy that people in general just don't understand, where a thing does not have to be played or used in its intended way to gain satisfaction. people can enjoy a thing playing it very differently than its intended purpose. I think that's the great thing about TTRPGs in general, is you can kind of just tell whatever stories you want to tell in them. And I think the funnest stories are sometimes when characters just go so far off script that they make their own game. I think that's where it gets really, really fun. The simple fact that you can play a character that is an atheist and learns that God is real and we vampires are children of Cain deal with it. Yeah, it is very interesting. I mean, I like the World of Darkness setting in general, even if it's very kooky, crazy. I think it's existed for as long as it has for a very good reason. I also would love to get into some Call of Cthulhu. Call of Cthulhu, I think, is also not a very action-y game. I know you can do some combat stuff in that game, but I don't think that's like the main design of the system. But again, I'm not 100% sure. It's just for most games in that general space, it's more just like horror predominantly, mixed with a bit of a thriller. That's a good question. How would I define Fabula Ultima? Fabula Ultima is like a JRPG game. But is that a genre for TTRPGs? I guess. Mechanically speaking, it predominantly leans on like JRPG elements. Yeah, I guess I'll just have to say JRPG. If anything, just for the recognizability of it. People who know JRPGs would be like, oh, it's a JRPG, TTRPG? Okay, I might be into this. No, not really. Final Fantasy maybe helped define some things, but it definitely doesn't define the whole genre. Are there games that focus on action without combat? You'll have to define action, because that was literally the conversation we were just having earlier. Theoretically, if you're talking about that has things like spectacle, chase scenes, stuff like that, but, you know, honestly, now that I think about it, I don't think there are games that would be classified as action that don't also just have a combat element in it. Like, that would be such a weird thing to try to separate, is like action from combat. Because again, we could define it as spectacle, chase scenes, all those kind of stuff. Stunts, physicality. All those aren't inherently combat, but they're usually tied to combat in some form or fashion. Call of Cthulhu should be about investigation more than action combat. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's why I would say I don't think I'd classify it as an action game. It's theoretically possible to have combat in the game, but I don't think that's a focus. I don't think that the game is defined by its action elements. I think it's defined by its intrigue and its horror elements. Intrigue, I think, is also a very interesting defining title for a genre, because intrigue, you know what, let's type it in. Let's use the internet some more. What defines intrigue? I think this is fascinating. To arouse the curiosity or interest of by unusual, new, or otherwise fascinating or compelling qualities. That's just the definition. Mystery is yes. I think every mystery is by definition an intrigue. But not... Yeah, but not all intrigues are mysteries. Just because your character doesn't know how a thing works in the setting doesn't make that a mystery. Even though we could, in language, say that it's a mystery to them. What defines a mystery is definitely different than like what necessarily the word would be determined as. But intrigue, I think, is a great way of describing like many of the World of Darkness games. Like, I would say Mage is very intriguing for that very reason. It's very unusual. I don't know if that would be a good defining term, though, for a TTRPG. But maybe. True. It's very true. That's an interesting concept, actually. Imagine being in a setting where technology is so advanced that you need, like, college doctorates to understand the technology, even though it's been simplified to the point where you could just press a button. And there's no simple way of describing or accurately describing a thing. Because, like, a lot of things currently that are kind of advanced can be roughly described to people in ways that are understandable. But, like, I feel like that gap of, like, trying to describe something will become so difficult at some point that, like, being told this button makes a ship go forward is vastly different than, like, to the point of, like, not being a relevant statement. Ooh, there's an Arkham Horror RPG. Has a pulp feel. Interesting. I love Arkham Horror. I have Arkham Horror. Probably can't see it because it's not well defined. Actually, I don't even think you can see it. Oh, no, it's on the bottom shelf. Came out a few months ago. That's cool. I love that. That sounds really, really awesome. Arkham or TTRPG. The Hungering Abyss. Oh, hey, it's by Edge Studios. Yep. Sorry, I'm reading the Arkham Horror stuff. Yeah, see, in this thing, like here on a website that predominantly caters to TTRPG stuff, they don't really have language that gives like any defining terms for the game other than that it's a TTRPG. It's a really tight D6 system. That sounds super hype. Let me send this to my co-host, who at the very least can appreciate it in his nurgly time here today. Boop. That looks like fun. That's definitely a game I want to try out. Yes, I was thinking what an action no combat game would look like. Maybe intervening during natural disasters. Not sure. Interesting. You know what? That could be a game. A game about just helping during natural disasters. Yeah. That would be the best way to do it, I guess. You just play like a first responder type character, individual. Heck, you could even have that in like high fantasy settings. It's just rather than being the one to fight the monsters, you're there like when everything is going down, just trying to save as many people as possible. Red Cross TTRPG. But yeah, I could very easily see that. A very action-y game about helping people. Building is collapsing, trying to get them out of the building in time. And that would have no combat in it. Yeah, that's interesting. That's a fun idea. You could have such good stories based on that too. Just the idea of like the hardship that people like that have to go through in their line of work, like the drama that can happen around it. I mean, that's the reason why Grey's Anatomy and all those hospital-based dramas are a thing. Is like it's hard. That's a very interesting TTRPG. I wish I had infinite money so I could just fund these kind of things to just exist, because I think it'd be cool if they exist. Do I think a lot of people would play it? Meh, probably not. But I think it'd be cool that it existed. I think it'd be fun to play for like a short-term campaign, like 10 sessions or something. Heck, it'd be even more cool if you had like a kaiju survival game, you know? Kaiju's ripping through the city and you need to escape kind of stuff. Granted, that's more of like a one-shot or a short-term game, but like that would also be really, really cool. And again, you can derive fun from it without the need for combat. And that would be action movie quality to say. You know what another interesting genre would be that would never have a very big player base? Has anyone watched Spice and Wolf or read Spice and Wolf? Because that is what I would qualify as a economic thriller. A show that's interesting, or a story that's interesting because it deals with like the cutthroatness of being a merchant and the politics around it. And while there is like action in the show overall, my favorite parts are not the action parts. So I would classify that anime slash manga slash light novel as an economic thriller. And playing a TTRPG based on something like that, you're just like a bunch of people trying to start a small business, would be really interesting. Would be really fun. Haven't seen TV or movies in 10 years. That's sad. Willingly. I'm glad that you added that. I'm glad you're not implying that you're being held somewhere against your will. Though, honestly, I don't know why anyone would go that long without seeing TV or movies. Other than just lack of interest, I suppose. I might have to try a Red Cross TTRPG. It, you know, honestly, like a first responder kind of thing. Heck, there's a TTRPG out there called Goblins with Fat Asses. There's a game for everyone out there. Mora trauma. I'm sorry to hear about this. Well, then I guess just keep on avoiding TV and movies. You don't need any more trauma. It just, TTRPG space has so much room to grow. So many interesting things. Well, I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, right? Does anyone here think I'm crazy for thinking that like an economic thriller or a first responder TTRPG would be fun? Am I crazy? Does anyone think I'm crazy for that? I'm honestly curious to see if anyone does think that's crazy, because I think those genuinely are interesting ideas. Oh, so hard without my co-host here. I'm running out of steam. Got 30 minutes left. I might end stream a little early today, give or take. But I think this is a very interesting conversation in general. I think we live in a situation where it's really hard to even define what games are good or bad, other than like lack of goodness gracious, lack of care, I guess. Like, a game that's shittily made is just going to be shitty no matter what, right? Lack of effort. There we go. Lack of effort. A lack of effort. But like, you can't really compare most TTRPGs to one another, except for very small areas, because they're just not the same kind of games. You can definitely compare games like D&D and Pathfinder 2e, heck, Starfinder 2e. They play and are intended to be played very similarly, unless you can compare and contrast their individual strengths and weaknesses. But, you know, it's like, for Vampire, you can't really compare it to those games. You could compare it to other World of Darkness or World of Chronicle games. Sure. But even then, like, you can't really compare Vampire and Werewolf because they're not the same type of game. The two types of stories you would be telling would be aimed at very different types of things. So, like, there would be equal validity in playing both rather than one versus the other. It's it's just fascinating because it's something that, yeah, sorry, yeah, I don't know how to get the two streams closer together. It's pretty wild. Maybe, well, I could probably just use a different service that might be just better at streaming to both the platforms at the same time. That would probably be the thing. I'm just lazy. But like, as I was saying, like, so you can't even compare those two games because, again, like, what you're going for is just vastly different. And like with the Cosmere RPG coming out here real soon, that's a very different game. It's not a tactical TTRPG, I would say, even though combat is a pretty decent size of the game. That's not, I think, what defines the game. I think the combat blends better into many of the narrative elements. And so saying it's tactical isn't quite the method, even though you could technically have tactics in it. I don't think it defines it well enough. So I would say, like with the Cosmere RPG, I would say it's a much a crunchier narrative based TTRPG, you know. But even that feels like it ill defines it. You know, it might be another Band-Aid situation where we just start defining it as Cosmere-like games. Though I've heard that it's got much of the same bones as the Star Wars TTRPG, so maybe, I don't know. It's very hard. I really, really wish we just had better language in general for defining TTRPGs, because have fun, Hoy. I'm probably gonna be ending here before too long anyway. Because it does a disservice, you know. More people would be interested in TTRPGs in general if it was easier for them to find games they might like. But when games are really only defined as this game is like this other game, or OSR, then it's something that makes it hard for people to kind of want to get into, because if you don't like those two major defining things, like, is it like another game that's popular? Which, you know, telling someone who doesn't play TTRPGs this is like Blades in the Dark means nothing. At least if it's D&D, they have a general idea of what you're talking about, but Blades in the Dark means nothing to someone who's not in the space. And so you have to kind of just use movie/game terms, media terms in general, to define things, which just makes it more difficult. I wish it was better. Hopefully, maybe, you know, like, having this conversation, people can watch this after the point. This can get more people thinking on it, but we just need better ways. And I think the hard part is we just need to have more hits in more different genres, more big games in different genres, so that we can start defining them. Because, like, that's how, like, the Survivors-esque, the Vampire Survivor-esque genre got made, was a game came out that was really, really good. And so now we just define it as either bullet heaven or survivors, like, you know, or Souls-like. Souls-likes is another one, which is like a very poor determining one. But when you say Souls-like, you know generally what people are talking about. So, you know, maybe it's just because we just don't have a very strong niche in general that we don't have enough defining language. I don't know. It's something I would like to work on. I'd like to better establish it so people can find games they like more. Because honestly, who has time to try out new TTRPGs? And to an extent where you can actually know if the game is one you would like or not. It takes a lot of time and preparation. Oh, no worries. It's rough. I get you. I do not blame you. You know. So it's rough. I would like to see more in the space in general. But I think I'm gonna end here, getting close to like 15 minutes early. Or 20 minutes early, I guess, right now, right? Yeah, 20 minutes early. It's an interesting question. And hopefully something that we can talk about more at a later point. Because I think TTRPGs just are more than just D&D, you know? And we just don't have a good way of expressing that to other people. And I think if we want the hobby to grow more, we need a better way of demonstrating the differences between games. But that's going to be it for me. If you are coming into this late, just know my co-host is sick today. That's why we have the Nurgle counter over here. And I still have a baby, and I will continue to have a baby, but hopefully that baby will be easier to take care of. So videos will return to the channel hopefully in the near future. Right now it's just been impossible. I'm just busy literally all the time, all day, every day. And look forward to potentially more 333 either next Tuesday or the Tuesday after. I have some people who are moving, who are in the game, and so they might just not be available on one of these days. So it is what it is. But if you're interested in the game, just stay tuned on the channel. Check out our Discord, linked in the description. And yeah, it's been fun. I'm gonna rest a little bit more so I can be ready for the night shift with the baby. And I'll see y'all next time. Bye.